This is Mission Control Houston. Atlantis currently at an altitude of 74 miles above the Earth, heading from southwest to northeast across the Pacific Ocean, soon to cross the equator, with a range to touchdown of just under 5,000 statute miles. Flight controllers here in the final throes of discussing runway options for Commander Terry Wilcutt. Everything on board very quiet. The crew now feeling the first effects of Earth's atmosphere as they are heading at about 25 times the speed of sound for their runway and their touchdown at the Kennedy Space Center. At the Florida Spaceport, preparations are well underway for the arrival of Atlantis and its 7 astronauts and cosmonauts to wrap up the 99th flight in shuttle program history. We'll now go to the Kennedy Space Center for an update on convoy preparations.
This is KSC Shuttle Ground Operations. All is in readiness for the landing of Space Shuttle Atlantis at the KSC Shuttle Landing Facility this morning. Most of the final preparations were completed yesterday afternoon when all of the convoy vehicles and their support systems were turned on and checked out. Personnel began arriving here at the runway at about 1 o'clock this morning, and the call to stations for the entire landing team was at 2 a.m. There was a final briefing by the landing convoy commander, after which the 20 convoy vehicles were deployed to the end of the runway just after the deorbit burn was completed. The shuttle landing facility is 15,000 feet long and 300 feet wide, about a third longer and twice as wide as a runway at a major international airport. This marks the 52nd shuttle landing in the history of the Space Shuttle program, the 23rd at KSC, and the 15th night landing. Astronaut Charlie Precourt began flying weather reconnaissance around the Cape Canaveral vicinity in the T-38 jet about 11 o'clock, and then at 12:30 a.m. he changed to the shuttle training aircraft, making approaches to the shuttle landing facility runways to evaluate landing conditions to the ends of the runway, as well as continuing to fly weather reconnaissance for the flight director and the Spaceflight Meteorology Group in Houston. The 3 a.m. official KSC weather observation had the wind southeasterly at 8 knots, a visibility of 10 miles, a temperature of 82 degrees, and a relative humidity of 88%. The Mila tracking station at KSC will acquire Atlantis about 13 minutes before landing, and will begin supplying controllers in Houston with voice data and telemetry communication starting about a minute later. At 11 minutes before touchdown, the orbiter will begin receiving navigation signals from the TACAM, the homing beacon, and the navigation signal at the shuttle landing facility. Also at this time, the first video from the pilot's point of view camera is anticipated, and as the orbiter intercepts the heading alignment circle, it will acquire the curved approach path of the microwave scanning landing system, which will bring Atlantis in for its final approach. After the orbiter's landing rollout is complete, there will then be the usual safety inspections and the so-called sniff checks to check for any toxic propellants which may have leaked or be venting. The astronauts will configure switches in the cockpit for post-landing operations and participate in the safing of the vehicle. When Atlantis is deemed safe and all of the potential hazards are free of any toxic gases, the purge and coolant umbilical access vehicle moves into position at the rear of the orbiter, and following the purge and cooling system connections, the crew transport vehicle moves into position adjacent to the orbiter access hatch on Atlantis's port side. There will be a cursory inspection of the thermal protection system tiles, the brakes, and the tires, and about an hour and a quarter after landing, the single time-critical mid-deck experiment can be removed. A physician will be aboard Atlantis and conduct a brief preliminary examination of the astronauts, and the crew will then make preparations to leave the orbiter and enter the crew transport vehicle for further medical evaluations. Following their departure from the runway, the crew will be taken to the astronaut quarters, which are located in the operations and checkout building about 5 miles away. They will then meet with their families, undergo thorough physical examinations, and have something to eat. They're scheduled to go back to the Johnson Space Center in Houston tomorrow.
beginning the first in a series of maneuvers to dissipate excess velocity as it approaches the southern portion of Mexico near the Central American border. Currently, Atlantis at an altitude of about 42 statute miles, dropping at a rate of 96 feet per second with a range to touchdown of just under 1,800 statute miles. Atlantis's rate of descent now beginning to increase at about 115 feet per second, traveling now 20 times the speed of sound with a range to touchdown of 1,400 statute miles. Again, Atlantis now will be making an overhead left-hand approach to runway 15 at the Kennedy Space Center. That is the northwest to southeast approach to the 3-mile-long landing strip. That information has been placed into Atlantis's onboard computers by Commander Terry Wilcutt.
Atlantis Houston, on Mila, good minicam view.
Houston, you got quite an echo in there.
The Merritt Island tracking station near the Kennedy Space Center now processing data from Atlantis's onboard computers. Atlantis 28 miles in altitude, range to touchdown less than 300 miles to runway 15 at the Cape. Time to touchdown 10.5 minutes.
Atlantis Houston, take TACANs.
The TACANs refer to the Tactical Air Navigation Aids, the first external aid to become available to Commander Terry Wilcutt as a supplement to the inertial measurement units.
Atlantis Houston, energy, ground track, and nav are go. Expect touchdown 1,600 feet at 200 knots.
Copy.
Those tactical air navigation aids, there are 3 redundant units aboard the orbiter receiving data on range, elevation, and bearing from radio beacons located at the Kennedy Space Center. Those are fed into the general purpose computers for use as the best available data for the guidance, navigation, and control of the orbiter during the final phase of entry and landing. Atlantis now 25 miles in altitude, range to touchdown just 215 miles as it approaches the Fort Myers area, dropping at a rate of 248 feet per second, time to touchdown 9.5 minutes. Now less to 8 minutes. The air data probes have been deployed on the orbiter. These are 2 probes located on each side of the orbiter's nose, which have pressure ports sensing the impact and static pressure at various points. Those readings are used to calculate the dynamic pressure against the vehicle, altitude, airspeed, the angle of attack, and the rate of descent of Atlantis to the Kennedy Space Center. Atlantis now just 118 miles from the Kennedy Space Center, traveling less than 4 times the speed of sound. Just about 4 minutes from now, Atlantis will approach the heading alignment circle at the Cape. That's the imaginary cone around the landing site pilots use as a point of reference to negotiate their way toward the final alignment of the shuttle with the runway. On final approach to runway 15, Atlantis will descend at an angle 7 times steeper than that of a commercial jetliner prior.
Atlantis Houston, clear data.
Again, on final approach to runway 15, Atlantis will descend at a so-called angle of attack, which is 7 times steeper than that of a commercial jetliner. That is prior to the flaring up of the shuttle's nose by Commander Terry Wilcutt to burn off excess speed prior to the deployment of the landing gear by pilot Scott Altman. Atlantis now just 70 miles from the Kennedy Space Center, descending at a rate of 255 feet per second, traveling about 2.5 times the speed of sound.
Atlantis, Houston, we see you on energy approaching the hack. New surface winds are 130 at 6 peak 8 head, 4 knots left crosswind. Nominal shoot deploy, nominal braking profile.
That drag chute, once deployed by pilot Scott Altman, will unfurl almost 90 feet behind the shuttle, helping to slow Atlantis to preserve its tires and brakes. Atlantis now just 10 miles in altitude, just 68 miles from the Kennedy Space Center, continuing a descend at a rapid speed of 215 feet per second. Time to touchdown 4.5 minutes.
I'm at the 180.
This is Mission Control Houston. Commander Terry Wilcott now executing an overhead left-hand turn to runway 15. He's about 3/4 of the way through his turn. Time to touchdown 2 minutes. Everything going very well in Atlantis' approach for landing at the Kennedy Space Center.
Atlantis, Houston, on at the 90.
Copy, on at the 90. And Houston, we have the field.
Atlantis, roger.
Atlantis is aligned with runway 15 at the Kennedy Space Center. Time to touchdown just over 1 minute. This view through the pilot point of view camera, the heads-up display with the field in view for Commander Terry Wilcott. This view out of the pilot on the right-hand side. Pilot Scott Altman's view of the runway clearly lit. This is the northwest to southeast approach as Terry Wilcott prepares to place Atlantis down on runway 15. He's in the pre-flare maneuver. Gear down and locked. Main gear touchdown. Standing by for drag chute deploy. Nose gear touchdown. Atlantis now rolling out on runway 33 at the Kennedy Space Center, wrapping up a 4.9 million mile mission, opening the door to a new home on the International Space Station.
Atlantis, we'll stop.
Atlantis Houston, Roger, we'll stop. Welcome home. Congratulations on an outstanding job. We are proud of you all and proud of this team. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Good to be back.
Atlantis, we'll meet you on page 5-3 for post-landing. We have no deltas.
This is Mission Control Houston. Not quite an hour following the landing of Atlantis at the Kennedy Space Center. All the crew members are off the vehicle, now in the crew transport vehicle, as the convoy down at the Kennedy Space Center prepares to take over control of the vehicle from Mission Control here in Houston. We'll go now to the Kennedy Space Center for continuing coverage of the post-landing operations and the safing of the Atlantis following its successful landing.